Perfect song for this week that precedes Tisha B'Av and is followed by so many more weeks of consolation. That's always been the Jewish attitude, Yeh Tov, Yeh Tov. This is a difficult week coming up. This is symbolically the saddest day of the year, Tisha B'Av, right? 9th day of Av. And it always aligns itself with this week's Parsha, which is Devarim, Deuteronomy, beginning of the book of Deuteronomy. And the rabbis play with the calendar to make sure that Deuteronomy is read right before the 9th day of Av, commemorating the destruction of the two temples and the loss of sovereignty and exile for the Jewish people. So why they want that connection? Because there's a word that is so important to the Tisha B'Av commemoration, and it's the first word of the biblical book that we read on Tisha B'Av called Lamentations, to lament, and the word is Echa. Echa doesn't mean lamentations. Lamentations is the English word, and Echa is the Hebrew word. And Echa is basically a cry, like, how? How can this possibly happen? How could this possibly be? It's a deep cry of a word. And that's how the book begins, Echa. And in this week's Parsha, we have Echa. We have the same word. But it's a different situation. And we'll try and see what the connection is. So Moses in this week's Parsha, after having suffered from so much rebellion, so much backsliding by the people he had led now for 40 years, he's about to die and they're going to enter the land of Israel, he finally screams out, Echa, how can I possibly bear all your troubles, all your burdens, and all the strife by myself? I can't do this anymore. And he screams out to God and to them. So it's the same word, but a different situation. Moses is trying to deal with all the complaints, but Lamentations is screaming about the destruction of the temple, the slaughter of tens of thousands of Jews, exile, slavery. Why do the rabbis want to draw that connection? So Rashi, of course, the great commentator, he dwells on it. He's wondering too, what's this connection? And he says this about Moses crying out and about the complaints of the Jewish people. He says it teaches that they were rebels. If Moses was early leaving his tent, they would say, why does the son of Amram leave so early? Son of Amram is Moses. Perhaps he is not at ease inside his house. If Moses was to leave his tent late, they would say, why does the son of Amram not leave? What do you think? He's sitting and he's devising and he's screaming against us and formulating plots against us. If he leaves early, it's no good. If he leaves late, it's no good. Complaint, complaint, complaint. Why are they keeping tabs, Rashi wants to know, on when Moses leaves his home? Why would anyone give a negative interpretation to everything Moses did on their behalf? So what's the connection between Moses' disappointment and these ridiculous complaints, petty complaints by the people, and the destruction of the temples, first by the Babylonians and by the Romans? It seems to be a small issue compared to something profoundly important in the history of the Jewish people. So how we read this lament by Moses about the situation and how we compare it to the disaster of Tisha B'Av, the Rashi says it's very simple. This was a prediction of what would happen if the people continued this type of childish, petty behavior. If they continue what they did to Moses in the future, the day will come when this pettiness and this strife, this inner strife, unnecessary inner strife, will eventually bring about a disaster. That's the connection. It's the same situation. It's pettiness, divisiveness over nothing significant. The rabbis tell us that the temple was destroyed by the Romans because of the pettiness of the Jewish people at that moment, because of the divisiveness. It so weakened them, it so clouded their decision-making that they were unable as a people to deal with the Romans. They were so weak by this internal strife that when the war broke out, they were unable to really muster the strength they needed to resist. The story that they tell that illustrates this pettiness is a story that they talk about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa, what's the story? There's a very influential, well-to-do man who's throwing a party, and he tells his servants to go deliver the invitations, right? Couldn't email them, he had to deliver them by hand, right? So, the servant unfortunately makes a mistake because one of the recipients was supposed to be Kamsa, and instead, he delivered it to Bar Kamsa. Kamsa was a good friend of the person throwing the party, and Bar Kamsa was an enemy. They never got along. But the man thinks, he just invited me to the party. Maybe he wants to make amends. Maybe we can fix the situation. I'm going to go. He shows up, and the host realizes that the wrong person received the invitation. And he wants to thrown out. And Bar Kamsa says, what, can't we make peace? This is in front of everybody, in front of the rabbis, in front of the elites of the community. It's a very important man. And he tries to make amends. He tries to make peace. He says, I'll pay for my food. Get him out of here. I'll pay for half the party. Calls on his guards. Throw him out of here. I'll pay for the whole party. Don't embarrass me in front of everybody. But he does it anyway. And he's humiliated. And what humiliates him the most is that the rabbi stood by and let this happen. Allow a person to be embarrassed in front of the entire community? He did nothing wrong. He received an invitation. There's the other guy who made a mistake. And so Bar Kamsa leaves, humiliated, embarrassed, and angry at the rabbis. And he decides he wants vengeance. So he goes to visit the Roman Caesar, the one who's in charge, the proctor who's in charge of that Yehuda of Judea. And he tells him the Jews are inciting to revolt against the Roman Empire. The Caesar's not sure if Bar Kamsa is correct. So he decides to send an animal offering to the temple and the Jews to see if this would be it's a peace offering, right? If they offer the peace, then maybe there's no rebellion going on. So Bar Kamsa purposely puts a moon, a cut in the animal, because then it can't be offered as a sacrifice because it's not perfect, right? The peace offering has to be perfect. And the rabbis can't offer the sacrifice. And the decision is, even though there are those who plead, offer the sacrifice. We don't want trouble with the Romans. Come on. We can't insult the Romans. The rabbis are stubborn, and they refuse to offer the sacrifice. And the result is the Romans think there is a rebellion, and eventually that argument, that strife, leads to the revolution against Rome. Of course, it's historically not exactly correct, but you get the point. The point was that the rabbis are trying to make in telling this story is that this hatred, this baseless hatred between this man and Bar Kamsa, the willingness to embarrass in public, the willingness of the rabbis to sit by and let this terrible scene unfold without standing up and teaching what's the right thing to do, that's what eventually led to the destruction of the temple. Internal strife, baseless hatred can so weaken a nation that in spite of its apparent strength, it's unable to hold off its enemies. I think that was Israel on October 7th. Divided, distracted, petty, arrogant, and it led to a disaster. The difference is Rome was the superpower of that day. But in the Mideast, Israel is the superpower of the Mideast, backed by the biggest superpower of all time, the United States of America. So that's the difference. We will win, but we can still cry out, Echa, this didn't have to happen. How did this happen? How could this possibly happen? And we're going to win, but Echa, what kind of price we are paying for this victory? Will lessons be learned? Will we be able to unite as a nation? We see the same discord in our own country that's weakening us. I believe so. I hope so. That's the lesson of Tisha B'Av. End the baseless hatred. End the contempt. Go back to your values. Unite as a nation. And then Rome can't beat you. And Iran can't beat you. And China and the Soviet Union can't beat you if you're strong, united as a people. We've had 3 weeks of what's called Puranut, 3 weeks of talking about disaster, the upcoming disaster signified by the 9th of Av. But after that, we will start 7 weeks of Nechama, of consolation. Again, the same lesson. After a disaster, after sadness, if we unite, if we gain strength, then we will have more than twice that of consolation, of celebration. And what does the 7 weeks lead into? Rosh Hashanah. The new year, a year of hope, a year of consolation, and a year in which we will see the hostages returned to their families in peace and in safety. And let's all say Amen and Shabbat Shalom.